I'm sort of aware that I've got sort of 15 minutes to do this talk. I think I might have sort of overrun by a few minutes, and I hope it's not too sort of overstretched. I usually spend about an hour and a bit talking about this stuff because it's just so much to go through. So I've tried to condense it as best as I can. So yeah, as Helen mentioned, my name is Wajid. I am the director of Modus Arts. I'm sort of in this era of identity politics. I'll sort of come out and admit that I'm a Mancunian. I live in London. I've been here for 30 odd years or so. So yeah, I'm a disguised Manc. I mean, maybe that's the way to sort of say it. Anyway, so the Tape Letters project, we've been working on this for the last sort of 3 years or so, and it is shining light on this unusual use of cassette tapes for long distance messages by British Pakistanis like my mum and dad. We've been looking at the era between 1960 to 1980, although we have sort of stumbled on instances where it sort of goes beyond that. So just to give you a bit of a background into the kind of work that we do, I sort of mentioned that I'm not an oral historian. I'm sort of essentially started off as a music producer, but then sort of got into sonic arts practice, and Modus was sort of set up to essentially envelop all these practices. So this is the kind of work that I normally do. So it's immersive performances, interdisciplinary collaborations with choreographers and live artists, weird experimental musical instruments using ostrich feathers, experimental compositions for contemporary dance, a subterranean sound installation at the Brunel Tunnel, the famous engineer, and some deep listening workshops for kids, and this is my personal studio, so it gives you a bit of an idea about the kind of work that I create. So, Tape Letters, it came about via inadvertently through this man here. This man is my father, Mohammed Yassin. He, in his spare time, used to sing a devotional hymn called the Naat. He would be asked to sort of sing this Naat in sort of various mosques and in people's homes, sort of in the late 60s and 70s, so in the north. And I was roped into do this when I was a kid as well. And over time, people sort of asked him to start recording these Naats on cassettes, just because it was convenient for them to listen to his voice in their own homes. Right? So he passed away 20 odd years ago, and it was about 5 years ago when I was looking for one of these cassettes in my mom's home in Manchester, and I found some of the Naats, but I also found these, and these weren't Naats, these were something else. And actually, when I had this cassette in my hand, I realized I had essentially a kind of a sort of a sonographic snapshot of these sort of monologues that were being sent between British Pakistanis here and their families in the UK, and that somehow there would be a bit of an insight into their migration stories. But really, I remember, essentially I was just transported to when I was a kid, being roped in to sort of say hello to some sort of, faceless auntie or uncle in Pakistan. And I'm kind of really awkward going, I don't know these people. I'm like, hello, uncle, auntie, I hope you're doing fine, we're doing fine. And that essentially was the extent of it, right? So I had this thing in my hand, and I realized that this wasn't a sort of this couldn't be transposed into a piece of art in any kind of way. The Arts Council weren't the right people for this, and so after kind of doing quite a bit of research and stringing up some partnerships, it was these guys. Now, some of you may sort of spot that this is an old logo. They've since rebranded, and but I still occasionally refer to them as the HLF. But at the time, they were known as the Heritage Lottery Fund. And essentially, they give us the funding to do a pilot. And in the pilot, we presented the case that what we try and do is to create an archive and of the cassette tapes, if we could find more of them beyond my own immediate family, and undertake some interviews, and try and shine light on the actual practice itself and try and discover why people used to do this thing. We would try and instigate dialogue between different generations of families. Like my nieces and nephews don't speak the language that my mum does. I do, so I have a sort of foot in between these two different generations. So essentially see what kind of heritage stories would pop up between different generations. Definitely try and prove that the cassette was a sort of a parallel system of long distance comms alongside letter writing and the occasional phone call. Do what we as artists sort of do well, I think, which is to sort of to present engaging exhibitions that essentially simplify complicated issues. Right? And one of the key ways of doing that was to make the language that I found on the cassette accessible, and to make sure that that was reflected back to the community that contributed to this archive. So, which is mainly Potwari, and I'll go into some details about the sort of unusual aspect of Potwari. So what we managed to do was to create the archive, and that's held at the Bishopsgate Library here in London. We sourced 22 cassettes. They're sort of extremely rare things, and we undertook 34 interviews. We created a number of sort of outputs. We've got a lovely looking website. We have mobile apps. We have lots of booklets. We put on a number of exhibitions in Manchester and in London, and we had something close to something like 21,000 exhibition visitors. So that's a really good footfall. I mean, that's a good footfall for any exhibition, let alone sort of an oral history thing, which are usually difficult to attract members of the public. We built trust within the British Pakistani community, and we made sure that our motives were really open. And very importantly, with regards to the Potwari language itself, we established working relationships with 3 teams in Pakistan. Without them, this just simply wouldn't have been possible, So here's a little bit of about what we found. This is Halima Javeen. This is my mum, and I'll just read this verbatim. Right. So I sent the tape once because my in-laws in Pakistan wrote me an unpleasant and rude letter. I couldn't read or write letters, so I recorded an intense reply. Intense meaning, an enraged reply. I've heard the tape, so I know it was enraged for sure. I gave it to a relative of mine who was going to Pakistan, but he found out what was on it and didn't give it to them and brought it back to the UK. And I sent it in the post to make sure they bloody got it. So it gives you, she's. And let me tell you, that's very much that quote is very much in line with how I know her to be. A very bolshy woman. These guys here. This is Asim, who lives in Bradford, and this is Asma, who at the time there was an arranged marriage between the two of them, and she lived in Gujarat in Pakistan. And they sent cassette tapes to each other for every 2 weeks for 3 years. So they have about 60 of these each, and they've given me 3 of them each. And I've said this a few times actually. Sometimes love hits you like that. I've been with my partner for 24 years or so, and I fell in love with her like that immediately. These guys, it sort of unfurled over time. So over that whole sort of 2 or 3 years or so, they fell in love via the cassettes, So that's a kind of and for them to give us access to these cassettes, and in some instances contain sexually explicit stuff. It demonstrates that we have a lot of trust about how this would be used and used ethically. This was Sarwar Ibrahim, and she mentioned, with her relationship to the cassettes, she could only listen to cassettes once because it was just too upsetting. Most people would revisit the cassettes and have multiple listens, but for her it was the exact opposite. Mohammed Zareen, his thing was he would listen to cassettes but never record a response. He would actually write letters in Urdu, i.e. not the language that the cassettes were in, because he wanted to demonstrate that he was literate and he was educated. So yeah, there's all sorts of interesting sort of socio-economic reasons as to why people use this too. Zareen Adar, for her, she sort of she was essentially didn't have access to education at all, like at all. I mean, talking about primary level, like nothing. And she's kind of, I think she's 80 now, and she still has a burning rage about the fact that it was her brothers that were able to sort of go to school and get an education, and that she wasn't, because she was a woman, and that was essentially the product of, you know, a sort of patriarchal, conservative Pakistan. Right? And so for her, you know, the cassettes, you know, were a way of sort of making her voice heard, you know. And these two guys and this girl here, they are my brothers and sister. And that's a very, you know, that's kind of East is East almost parody, isn't it? Kind of how kids sort of looked back in the day. But yeah, one of the interesting things we uncovered as well, which is obviously things around identity. I'm second generation Asian. I was born in Manchester, and having these sort of parallel lives and about what it means to be Pakistani and what it means to be British Pakistani, what it means to be English. And one of the kind of memories that I remember sort of going back to was the idea of being asked to sing the Pakistani national anthem on these cassettes, you know, and there's me kind of just essentially wanting to watch Tiswas. Yeah, all sorts of really interesting, you know, notions about identity sort of come up. The approach we took is pretty extensive. Given that I sort of mentioned that we found Potwari as the sort of main language on the cassettes. Potwari is a transitional language, according to Ethnologue, the website, and it's essentially transitions from Punjabi to Hindko, and apparently it's categorized as a proper language, not as a sort of a dialect of Punjabi. But it's an oral only language, so it isn't written down. So we took the approach of using Urdu to transliterate. Now, if you can read Urdu, that says, Pehli cheez hai to suna na kehda, and then the interviewer says, Mara naam Mohammad Zareen. Now, that would never be said, so that would never be written in that kind of way. In Urdu, you wouldn't write that. You would say, Aapka naam kya hai in Urdu, for example. And we've transliterated in English, not everything. This is just an example because it's a lot of effort, and then obviously we translated it into English, and we have a time code, so we can obviously go to any point in the audio if you like. And you know, and we've done this to everything we've touched. So imagine the amount of work that's kind of involved in this, you know. We have the archive. The archive now exists at the Bishopsgate, so you know, everything is just being poured into that at the moment. We're at the collections phase of our current project, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But this is one of the outputs, and it's from this archive that now everything's sort of really manifesting and springing out. We created a whole range of outputs. You know, as I mentioned to you before, we like the idea of having very strong public engagement. It's very important for us to get that right. So we put on exhibitions. We had, you know, an interactive iPad app. There's the Bishopsgate. And created booklets and you know, all sorts of really interesting things. This is the exhibition that was on at the PHM in Manchester, and it was chosen as the 2018 community project, and it was there for a month. Yeah, we had a huge, we had very, very positive feedback on that. To give you an idea, this was a private event that we held for certain members of the British Pakistani community in the north, and you can see there's some elderly folk here. They have never been inside a gallery. Like, it was the first time they'd actually set foot inside a gallery, and you can imagine what it was like for them, you know, to have their memories, their experiences, their lives, you know, reflected back to them in their language, inside a kind of spatialized multi-speaker fancy, you know, array. So yeah, we had people crying, we had people laughing, you know, it was really emotional for us. So here we are. We are now dealing with the Heritage Fund, and the Arts Council have actually joined us this time around, because I think they understand, you know, where we're going with this thing. We couldn't have done this without On the Record. And On the Record are an oral history experts, really, and they essentially helped us form the project from the off. You know, given that we're sort of artists, we wanted to make sure that we got the right kind of processes involved to sort of get these stories out. And Rosa Schilling from On the Record was instrumental in making that sort of happen. So we've got a really robust methodology in place, and it's a tangible thing. We can see it really working. So here we are. Our project aims for the sort of, essentially now it's a nationwide project. We've hired teams in the South, in the Midlands, and in the North, and they're all sort of uncovering extraordinary stories at the moment. We're in COVID times, right? But let's talk about that in a while. But our intentions were to essentially really ram home how this is a vital piece of heritage, for the British Pakistani community who haven't really seen the value of this previously. We wanted to expand on the archive. We wanted to uncover any other sort of oral-only languages that were, potentially on these cassettes. Delve deeper into the main themes and the sub-themes, and of course, sort of produce a range of multilingual outputs in the past. What we've done so far is we've got an extraordinary team of people, and I'm very, very happy to be working with all of them. We've sourced 19 cassettes so far, and we've got 16 interviews that we've done remotely and 6 in person. We were, obviously, given that sound is kind of very instrumental to the way we think about things, we couldn't undertake face-to-face interviews, which is where we would have used our kind of high-quality broadcast Sennheiser mic sets, which cost $1,000, whatever. So we've created a kind of an audio pack, which allows us to do something not too far. So the mic that we're using, the profile is not too far off from the kind of very high-quality mics. And I've been able to create 30 packs of these, and we're sort of sending them out, and that's how we're doing it. So we're doing it remotely via Zoom. Some interviews we can do in person. We have captured interviews in an array of different languages, and we are now working with a Dr. Farah Nazir, who's a linguist, and she's helping us with the IPA on, instead of my clumsy way of transliterating, she's sort of doing it properly using the International Phonic Alphabet. And there's just all sorts of people who are interested in this, as putting it on as a play, and poets and collaborations with VR designers, all sorts of things going on. And I'll finish off with one of the cassettes that we found so far on our recent search. This is from a cassette by Dr. Karamat Iqbal, who's based in Birmingham. So I think he's not on the sort of East Midlands side; he's in the sort of Central Midlands, I think, in Solihull. And he came to England, I think, in the sort of late 60s, maybe early 70s. And he was 12 when he arrived with his sister and with his dad, and his dad went back to Pakistan. So the 2 kids were here on their own. And this is on the right is a photograph of, I think, his dad and his granddad. And you can see the cassette player there. And his father would send him cassette tapes to essentially give him a moral compass and guide him through various things that he had to deal with here in the UK. And his father's passed away. So these cassettes, that cassette here, these are the equivalent of the ashes of this man, right? And it's an extraordinary thing that he's managed to give us these cassettes. And he in an interview with him, he came up with this line which I thought was devastating. He said, as a child, you may remember the imaginary friend, but my imaginary friend was my father. That's an extraordinary thing to mull over, So yeah, we think we've stumbled on something pretty special, So you're welcome to engage with us in any way you like. We have a website that's well developed. We have social media strategy in place. We have our team. We have a millennial on our team who's kind of good at all this stuff, and I'm not. I'm 52, old bloke who kind of is not ready to go on TikTok just yet, and all that. But anyway, Modus. This is Modus's website. You're welcome to jump onto my own personal website as an artist and sort of see some of the kind of other work that I do beyond Tape Letters. And thank you. I'll just stop sharing and see where that goes.
Thank you, Majid. That was absolutely fascinating. An interesting topic that's come up that you might want to comment on from Stephanie. Just really thinking about, well, I'll just read Stephanie's comment and then we can take it from there. She's noting that it's interesting to see there's a proportion of the projects, particularly that we've had this afternoon, that are funded by the Arts Council as well as Heritage Lottery funds, and considering what is artistic about oral history, what and that straddling of oral history and creativity. Is that something you've got any thoughts on that you might like to comment on?
I'm very used to being funded by the Arts Council. The Arts Council love us. We've sort of we've done many projects over the years, and we're consistently funded by them. In fact, we've been offered NPO status, which is a national portfolio organisation. So we're on the verge of that. When I spoke with the Heritage Fund at the time with this idea, one of the points that was made by them was that artists, when they consider any kind of project that involves heritage or oral history in some kind of way, they tend to get overblown with the idea of it, and they kind of really just focus on the arts side of it and don't actually spend time to do the work. And I think you can kind of gloss over the sort of the oral history and the kind of heritage core of any project that is multi or interdisciplinary. But I think it's vital. This project has at its heart is that. And it's just manifesting because we're artists and we can do it in some kind of way. But at its core is really robust methodology, and we've spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources in making sure that's right. So I think it's really easy to say, yeah, let's make an oral history project a work of art, or let's make an arts project a work of oral history. But I think you need to spend a lot of time to really get in the core discipline right. So for sure, I'm really into disciplinary work. I love the idea that that poets can try, stagecraft and whatever, But I think that needs to come from an informed position.
Yeah. Creativity and oral history is a really interesting relationship. And just to flag up for anyone who's interested, there's a new special interest group that's been created within the Oral History Society to explore creativity in oral history. And I'll pop the link in the chat if anybody's interested in looking at that in more detail.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Imran. How has the project created the intergenerational conversation, or intended to do this under/post lockdown?
So pre-lockdown, there was all sorts of really interesting aspects to this project that we uncovered. For one thing, it is located within a time frame. There are technological sort of realities around it. So as sort of the telecommunications network in Pakistan and the UK sort of developed further, then cassette tapes just simply weren't used because it's a faff. I mean, getting a sort of a monologue stretched over that distance over time, you don't really get to know anything in real time. So obviously, the further along we've got with technological development, the less people would use this thing. So you can kind of look back at this as music media, and I think people of my generation can look at it and go, it's just quite lovely to listen to records. Right? It's lovely to listen to cassette tapes, and whereas sort of millennials will go, that's really cute, right? This is really ironic. They can ironically listen to their records, and in some way, like alongside that is this kind of stretching of language, of linguistic ability, right? So my son, like my partner's Swedish, and my son, his second language isn't Patois, it isn't Urdu, it's Swedish, right? And when he speaks to my mom, my grandma, his grandma, like it's very, very limited, right? So we can see this thing, and in fact, that's what happens with migration. It just essentially language changes and all sorts of other behaviors sort of change as a consequence. My cousins, Like my mum, two sisters took a divergent migratory route, right? So my mum came to the UK, and my auntie went to Canada. So my cousins are Canadians. They're North Americans. They've got the Canadian twang, and when we chat, they're like, "Oh, you guys are Brits, right?" Yeah. So this is the consequence of these kind of these generational shifts, and post COVID, yeah. I mean, yeah. Let's. I think that would, yeah. Maybe we can leave that for some other time. I think. I mean, what would you like to know? How we've done the COVID, our interviews, or like?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to give us, we'll go for another couple of minutes if you want to explain, and then I've just one final question I'd like to put to you here. Do you want to just talk about your COVID stuff, and then I'll do this question?
Yeah. So we were sort of essentially ready to go when it came to undertaking interviews in person, and of course, the whole sort of lockdown happened, and so we were just, okay, well, does this put the project in hold? And we sort of scrambled around, and we put together a pack. We put together, can you see this thing here?
Yeah.
Okay, so in this thing is a fancy little microphone. It's called the Clippy EM172. It's made by a boutique mic manufacturer in Middlesex. And we have some really comfortable headphones, and we spend a lot of time in setting that up with different people's devices. So we can't do these interviews in person. The original idea was that our teams, wherever they're located, that the southern team would deal with capturing oral histories and interviews in the south. Now what's happening is just all over the place, and it's fantastic. And we can do multiple interviews. We can have multiple team members interviewing the same person. We can have one person interviewing multiple members of the families on different days. It's completely opened up what we can do, and we can still hang on to this idea that it's high quality. This is very good quality capture, which we can use in our outputs, right? So we've got it right, we think.
Excellent. I'm going to ask this one last question. Again, it comes from Stephanie. There are big conversations going on in the museum and archives sector about institutional racism and upholding of white privilege. And in the case of Tape Letters, this project has not come from an archive, but I believe is going to an archive, eventually the Bishopsgate Institute. She wonders if she's correct with that. And she was wondering how or why that decision had been made, and was it a funding requirement?
No, the archive itself was, we approached the Bishopsgate Institute before we'd even approached the Heritage Fund. And Stefan Dickers, who's the head librarian there, he's one of the most kind of vibrant librarians I've ever met. He's an extraordinary guy, and they specialize in alternative oral histories. Our tapes and our interviews couldn't be in a better place. They couldn't be in a better place, So I'm very, very proud that and as soon as he, I came up and had a meeting with him and sort of talked to me about this project, his eyes were like this, and he was like, "Oh my God, we definitely need to have this as one of our archives that we're holding, So we needed to get them on board before we did any proposal. But once we had them on board, and we were just basically partners, just fell into place, With regards to racism, oh my God, it's an extraordinarily complicated thing, and it just opened up. So many aspects of that can be discussed, and I'd rather not go into it because I think there's too many areas where we can sort of look into that. But what we have done is to make this accessible. I wish I could show you some of the sound poems and the vignettes that we created on the back of the archive, which basically made this multilingual, multi-accessible to multiple generations, and it didn't really matter where you came from. It genuinely didn't matter where you came from, whether it's Sweden or Patois or Solihull. But yeah, I mean, and that clearly isn't to discount the fact that there's all sorts of problematic issues with racism, and that's endemic in wherever, whatever field.
It's a whole conference in itself, isn't it, really?
I think so, yeah.
One last point. Arlene would like to know, how much did it cost to put the packs together that you about?
You want to make one, don't you? You want to make one of these things. Okay. was thinking about this thing. I was thinking about whether I should make this kind of open in terms of what we've done, because we've spent a lot of time, a lot of expertise in trying to put this together. If you would like, I will tell you, I can share with you all of the equipment that's in these packs, and you can get them yourself. And I can let this manufacturer know that you're interested, because I think by using this, we've notched up the quality of what we can do, what we can capture. The costs for this thing in total, including the bag and the headphones and the adapters, because we have adapters in here that can be used by any device, like whether it's a really old style computer with two, a mic in and a headphone out port, or a combined port like my MacBook Pro, or whether it's an Android or an Apple phone or whatever, we've got everything's in there. All in all, the whole thing, £100. So that's brilliant. That's compared to my other mic pack, which costs £1,000. This is great, and I've made 30 of these, and yeah, it's facilitated, on a whole array of.
Lovely. Would I be best to say, if anybody's got any more questions about it, to direct them directly to you, to maybe email you? Your website address is in the program, which everybody will have a copy of.
Yeah, and just email me directly.
Okay.